Well, my name is Daniel.
I'm Lauren.
And we are professional videographers. Our company's name is The Moment Imaging. And we were hired in August of 2019 to go film a 10-day retreat in Mount Shasta. So we headed out there, and we had where we were staying were 2 Airbnbs. They were very large houses to fit the crew for the retreat that was running over the 10 days. And so there was one house that was a block from the house that we were staying in, which was down a long driveway that was secluded in the woods. We were surrounded by forest and foliage all around us. So we're on this trip, this spiritual retreat, and we're having a lot of fun doing the filming and meeting great people. And we're hearing from the locals that there's a Sasquatch community, and that it's so prevalent in Mount Shasta that there's a day that honors them as a species. There's a Bigfoot day in Mount Shasta. We thought that was cool. Like a festival, but we hadn't had any experiences ourselves until the 5th night that we were there at this house tucked away in the woods. At the end of each day, we would go to the second house and we'd do a game night where everybody would just sort of let loose and play pool and table hockey and things like that. And we were out pretty late. We had come home late and gone to bed late, and shortly after I fell asleep, I was woken up by loud banging and crashing sounds on our 2-story house. And Lauren actually shook me up. She shook me awake and said, "Daniel, something's going on." I don't know if one of the guests had gone outside and was upset, but our house was getting banged on. There were things being thrown at the windows and banging on the big metal garage door that we had. There were grunts. Now, I didn't hear any of the grunts or the moaning because most of that was on the other side of the property where all of the men were staying. So we get up the next morning and everybody sits us down because we all had sort of like a huddle in the morning, the whole crew and team. And they pulled us aside and said, "Listen, last night our house was literally attacked by what sounded like a group of people or beings or something to that nature when they were grunting and moaning and throwing things at the house." Now, I had heard it, but nobody was brave enough to go outside. So that's the extent of my experience. So flash forward to the next day, which would have been about the 6th day into the retreat. There was another guy there that I met, and we're both native. We had decided to sort of partner up, and after the end of each day, we wanted to go out into the woods and see if we can sort of initiate some sort of contact with the Sasquatch that everybody had been talking about, that we hadn't had any personal experiences with, except for the banging on the house and the yelling and the growling. So he and I had gone out at about 12:30 the next night, and we were walking down the long driveway that went to the main artery road where our house was out on the property, and we actually heard a large bipedal running through the woods. Right next to us, you could hear very heavy weighted footsteps running, and we stopped dead in our tracks as we were walking to where we kind of wanted to go to sort of do some prompts. And that was fascinating that we heard that heavy weighted running. So we stopped there instead. We didn't go any further. And Alexi and I started to do some clapping and do some knocking sounds. Alexi did some calls. And when we got back at the tree line, which was alongside parallel to the driveway that went from where the property was to the main road, we were getting knocks back. So we were getting responses. And they were coming in intervals of 3. So as I would clap, say 5 times, we would get 3 definitive knocks back. It sounded like maybe a large tree branch hitting another tree. I don't know what they were using. It wasn't rocks, but it sounded like they were clubbing on something. So that was very fascinating, and we felt that based on where we were, which was so secluded, that was definitive contact in a sense. Flash forward to the next day, we had heard banging on a metal fence outside the house, which, mind you, there's no neighbors around us. We're very secluded. So I had decided to leave out some food to see what would happen if these beings were coming to the property right up to the house. I wanted to see if they would possibly eat something that I left as an offering. So I left out a handful of grapes and a handful of chips. And I put them under a very large tree that was literally right in front of the house. Flash forward to the next morning, we came out, and the grapes and the chips were gone. Okay, so we thought that was pretty cool. Flash forward to that night, Alexi and I go out again, and we try to promote more contact, so we did some meditating. I have also heard that it's very important that these beings are sensitive and empathic to your vibrations, so you want to make sure that you are not in a fear-based state. because they may not want to approach you or make their presence known if they know that you're scared of them. So we did a lot of sort of affirmations and clearing of our energy fields, and did some more clapping, and then we got more knocks back in the woods, 3 definitive knocks. And that went on for about a half an hour until he and I decided to go home. So flash forward again, I decided to leave out some different things. Now I left out a slice of bread, 1 piece of bread, and some chocolate, and another handful of chips. Coming into the next morning, the chips are gone. The chocolate hasn't been touched. They did not want the chocolate. And the bread had been peeled halfway. The crust had been peeled off half of the slice of bread, almost surgically. It hadn't been nibbled on. It didn't have any bite marks in it. Mm-hmm. It was peeled very carefully, and the edges were perfectly straight. It didn't want the bread. So here's the most fascinating part about leaving the food as an offering. The dirt around the base of the tree was very dense, very solid, very hard. There was a burnt wood chip wedged into the dirt exactly where I had been leaving the food each night. And the dirt was so hard that if I tried to dig into it or cut into it in any way, you had to really sort of grind at it. So it isn't something that could have fallen out of the tree or been placed there by accident. We'd gone to this tree 4 or 5 times already, and it had never been there until this morning. The other strange thing about it was that it was burnt on one side, and then clean on the other. So I didn't know how to interpret it, other than the fact that I like to think that it was an offering or a gift in some way, saying thank you for leaving out the items of good faith. So the second to the last night that we were on the retreat, I decided to, in addition to leaving out the food, the tree was facing the kitchen window of the property that we were staying at, and it must have been no more than, say, 20 feet from the kitchen window. I decided to put an audio recorder on the inside of the kitchen in the screen to let it run all night while we were sleeping to see if I could capture any vocalizations or movement or footsteps, and I left out more food. And this put us into Saturday morning. So I came out the following morning, and the recorder was still going. So I just stopped it and I checked out, and then I put out more food, and I just put out chips and grapes again, and it was gone. So because they don't like chocolate or that kind of chocolate, which I thought was funny. So this puts us at Saturday, and that final night we had gotten back from game night, and this is where we had one of the most amazing experiences of my life, at least. Yeah. When we had. So the second property that we were staying at was like a 2-minute drive down the road. And I was the driver of the van that we had rented, and Lauren was up in the passenger seat with us, and it was about 12:30 in the morning. Mm-hmm. We were driving home in the dark with the high beams on. Mm-hmm. And everybody was in this Bigfoot sort of frenzy because we were talking to all the guests about the house getting banged on and stuff thrown at us, and some guests at the other house had rocks and sticks left outside their windowsills on the second floor of their house. So we were all having some sort of contact and experiences. Alexi and I had been having the clapping and the knocking several nights in a row. And so here we are driving down the road, and in the headlights in front of the vehicle, right where the mouth of our driveway is, okay, so immediately as if we were going down the main artery road, we have to make a right-hand turn to go down our long driveway to get to our house. Lauren and I saw a full-bodied, roughly 8-foot tall Sasquatch. Mm-hmm. And it was running down the street away from the direction that we were driving in the vehicle. And because we had the headlights on, the high beams on, we could clearly see definitively, right?
The size, the color, it was what it looked like was a large man in a brown fur suit. He was very large. And
8 feet tall.
Yeah.
In reference to the height of the van.
Yeah, and we had 4 other men as passengers behind us who also saw it in that moment with us, and we slowed down.
So there's 6 people in the van, right? Mm-hmm. So it was myself driving, Lauren in the passenger seat, and then 4 people behind us. And since we were all in this Bigfoot frenzy for the last 5 days talking about the contact that Alexi and I had been having, we were all sort of hoping something would happen before the retreat ended. And so I didn't know what to say. I blurted out. I said, "Here we go, guys. Here we go." That's what came out. And everybody leaned over real quick, and they all looked over our shoulders. So here's what happened. we see the 8-foot being running right in front of our driveway. And as it's moving away from the vehicle, the direction we're driving, it begins to transform to what I would understand is some sort of shape shifting. And it's important that I really explain what it looked like, because when we say transforming or shape shifting, we think about the movies when the werewolf the man turns into the werewolf, or the werewolf turns into the man, and it's a very organic mutation. That's not what we saw. Okay, do you want to explain sort of how this worked?
Go ahead.
It went from running bipedal upright to down on all fours. So then it starts moving like this. And as it's running, it begins to transform into what looked like is a very large wolf. And we could see a big bushy tail form behind it. And the color of the fur changed also. The color of the fur lightened up. It was a much lighter tone than the darker hair of the Sasquatch. And as it transformed, it didn't mutate from one form to the other. It looked more holographic or digital, in the sense that if you were to take two pictures and you lay them on top of each other, and then you lower the opacity of the top photo, you're going to get what would look almost as like a ghostly sort of digital blending, is what it looked like. And as it transformed into the wolf form, it then started to phase again. It almost looked blurry into a small black bear. So it went from a upright Sasquatch to a wolf to a black bear, all in the matter of about 8 seconds.
Yeah, no time at all.
Less than 10 seconds. And I just think that the weirdest part about it was that it wasn't like an organic mutation. It was almost like a phasing in and a phasing out of shapes and patterns and textures. Color of the hair changing, total sizes changed.
Yeah.
And then the weirdest part, you tell them the weirdest part.
The weirdest part was that what ended up looking like the black bear was running ahead, and it stopped and it turned back to watch us, but its feet were still large. They still were the same Bigfoot Sasquatch feet, despite having turned from 3 different colors, 3 different sizes, from bipedal to on all fours. The feet were still the same.
They were large, huge, tan color, not the color of the bear. No hair on them, in a sense. I didn't see a lot of hair, did you?
No, okay.
Didn't seem like there was a lot of hair on them, and they were a lot lighter tone than the rest of the black bear, and they were disproportionate to the size of the bear, which was relatively small. It would have been like a quarter of the size of the Sasquatch. It shrunk down that much, but the feet were huge, and they looked almost comical. And it just stopped, and it looked back at us right in the middle of the street. It moved away from our driveway so that we can get into the driveway, and it just looked back like, what? And I'm like, nothing. It's cool. And so we all sat there, we looked at each other. I looked to the guests in the back, like, you guys saw that, right? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, okay, cool, let's go home. So I just made a right-hand turn, because it was synchronized. After all of the hype and all of the contact protocols and experiences that we had, we didn't actually think we'd have a real physical sighting of the being. But it was not just the sighting, but the transformation was amazing. And then it was the last night. It was the final night of the whole thing, and it just culminated into that experience. And I lived 17 years in Washington State, which, if you follow cryptozoology, Washington State has some of the most sightings in the country, and I never had an experience while living there. And then I go on this 10-day retreat for a gig and had the experience. It was amazing. I'll never forget it. So that's our encounter with the Sasquatch.